voice, and I'm happy to be back to do another segment. First off, I would like to just have a brief moment of silence for all those who have lost their lives, who are suffering, and who have dealt with insurmountable obstacles during this global pandemic. So I'm just going to give about 5 minutes for us to have a moment of silence for those who need prayer and encouragement, because this is a really tough time for us globally. So I'll do that. Yes. So it's also Holy Week this week, which is extremely significant for me because exactly 45 years ago this week, when I was 11 years old, I was diagnosed with diabetes. So I want to dedicate this segment to young people and diabetes, especially since so many of you guys are home. So if you want to watch it with your parents, it's fine. If you want to watch it by yourself, it's fine. You can watch it multiple times. However this can benefit you, use it to your advantage. I wish when I was a young person, I had someone like this who actually went through things that they could share to help the experience of living with diabetes be more understandable from, as I say, a psychological perspective. Because I like to talk about the things that you can't find in a textbook and the things that you can't learn from studying. And so I feel like my efforts to take care of myself for all these years aren't in vain. So I hope this is beneficial to you all. My channel's title changed from two, rather. I'm not even going to mention the old one because it's so long. But my new channel title is Felice and Diabetes. It's very simple. And what I do is I provide real world experiences rather about living with diabetes. So without further ado, I'm gonna get started. So like I said, 45 years ago, when I was 11 years old, my mother had taken me to the doctor after she and my father noticed that I had been losing a lot of weight. I went from maybe 80 pounds or 70 pounds down to like 50 pounds. I was wetting the bed, just out of the blue that started happening. I couldn't get enough to eat. And because we had the unfortunate experience of losing my brother, who was a year older than me, he died, I mentioned in a previous segment, when I was a month old. He died at 2 years old, and they said he had diabetes. And so my parents became more aware of what to look at in terms of signs and symptoms. So there was this thing called a test tape that you could buy over the counter. And it looked like similar to some dental floss containers where you pop it open and you pull the tape out. So the test tape, you would dip it in urine. And so the result should be, if you don't have diabetes, it would be green. Or it would be yellow. And my parents dipped it in my urine and it came out black. So they scheduled an appointment with me, and I went to see my doctor, who was a wonderful physician in the lower ninth ward. He was a Caucasian doctor. He was gay, and he was on it. He was on his job, and he came and he worked in the area where I lived, which was predominantly Black, and he helped the community a lot. I'm always feel so much love towards this man because he turned me on to stuff like vitamins and fasting, intermittent fasting and all this. And this was in the early 70s. And fortunately, my parents were open-minded enough to to follow his advice. And I know that was a major contributor to my longevity. And also, this man took care of me from my initial diagnosis at 11 until I became pregnant with my son at 22 years old. He was wonderful, and I will always be grateful to him. And he was part of the reason why I decided to become involved in the healthcare realm, because once I got diagnosed, I said, oh, I'm going to find a cure for this. So me and my mom went to his office. They did blood work and everything and determined that I did indeed have what they called at the time juvenile diabetes. So he came in the room and he told me and my mom, he said, I'm sorry to tell you that Felice definitely does have diabetes. And he and my mom looked at each other, and I looked at him and I said, what? So you mean to tell me I'm not going to be able to eat my wedding cake when I got married? And they looked at each other and they just burst into laughter, because the reality was that's all I was thinking about. You know, I didn't think about diabetes like, oh, this is going to take me out, even though I had a sibling pass away from it. It's just a kid being a kid. And so that was the beginning of my journey. And I'm very happy that I had the support system that I had with my parents and my physician. So when I think about being a kid with diabetes, some children I believe I had diabetes before I was diagnosed. And one telltale sign was that I would scratch and scratch and scratch and scratch as a kid. I had sores on my legs. I got teased about it. People would call me scar leg and, you know, typical growing up stuff. And that was years before I was diagnosed. Other than that, I really didn't show any symptoms until I did get diagnosed. So it was initially overwhelming, especially for my parents, because what that did was trigger all the memories of the loss of my brother. And based on conversations I had with my oldest sister, she lent a lot of insight around how tragic that experience was. And it made me understand a lot of things, like the overprotectiveness that I had to deal with, especially from my father. So anyway, like I said, I was diagnosed at 11. And so I went home and they gave me this packet of information that I was clueless about. And it was about food exchange lists and measuring your food. And it was all Greek to me. And my mom did her best, and she did a really great job because my dad worked a lot and he worked at night. So I was around my mother more. But she did everything according to what the doctor wanted me to do. So I used to get my blood work done regularly. And I can remember being a kid, y'all, young people, when you go to get blood drawn and your veins are so little, and it can be very painful. And it wasn't the best experience, but I made it through. So when you find out you have diabetes and you're a young person, know that you will make it through. The other thing is, and for parents, know this person here had a parent who really didn't know much about healthcare. My mom and dad didn't really know about the body, but they learned and they adjusted and they did a great job, you know. So first off, know that you will be able to manage it and you will be able to make the adjustments. But when you're diagnosed with diabetes at a very young age, even kids who were diagnosed initially or who are born with diabetes, I really have a lot of respect for you guys, because you hit the ground running. But what I do know is that studies typically show that younger people do very well with self-management, even with using technological devices like insulin pumps and continuous glucose monitors and things of that nature. Typically, young people don't have issues with self-management until they get around high school age. And I think that's just a growth and developmental situation that young people go through. So when I think back on when I was diagnosed a week before Easter, my gosh. And it was upsetting. That first Easter, I pretty much stayed uh, in a room. It was rough being a kid, and everyone, all your friends, had candy and Easter baskets, and my parents did the best they could. But back in those days, they didn't have many options for a person with diabetes. And I didn't expect to get emotional talking about this. But I've never shared this story before. I've never shared this story before. But it's worth it. And I always, like I said, I want to be real. I talked in another segment about people living with diabetes. And some things trigger you because you're living with something that can affect your quality of life day in and day out, and it gets overwhelming. And I never thought back on that until talking about that right now, young people. You have to give yourself permission to feel what you need to feel. Because until somebody walks in your shoes, they don't understand. So as I mentioned, learning about how to manage diabetes and getting diagnosed the week before Easter, I can remember my mom and I, because I had to start taking insulin. And I can remember my mom would come in the room and she would I used a syringe and a vial. That's all they had back then. And we would sit down and it would say, make sure you don't have bubbles in the syringe. And we were like, oh my God, if I have a bubble in the syringe, I'm going to die. Because nobody really explained that what the bubbles do in your syringe is change the dose so you may not get enough. You can't inject a bubble from an insulin syringe into your body and cause what we call an embolism. But that's stuff that you learn as you go. So it's important to ask questions when you're young and when you're living with diabetes. It's very important. If you have a question, there's no stupid questions. Like I educated people about taking insulin injections using a pen. You would be surprised at how many people who don't know how to take the top off the cap where the needle is, and then there's another small piece that you have to take off before you can give yourself. I know people who were trying to give insulin and they couldn't understand why their blood sugars weren't going down. Well, they weren't injecting it in their body. They still had a cap on the needle. That's just understanding simple things about what you need to do to manage yourself. And that comes from the people who are taking care of you, because your providers are responsible for making sure you know simple things. And that's why I say it's no stupid question. Don't be ashamed about feeling what you need to feel, young people. So I'm living proof, because I'm talking about things that I haven't talked about in many, many years. So I got diagnosed. My family, they all were made aware. Some of the responses were positive. Some of the responses were not. I heard a lot of misinformation, or it ran in a family and it skips generations and this, and why did Fee get it and other people didn't get it, and don't baby her because she has diabetes, and don't treat her any differently because she has diabetes. It was so much chatter going on around my diagnosis from other family members, and people who really had their own issues. So, for the parents, allow your children to understand that diabetes is, first off, is very manageable, and that they can live a great life with it. I have no complaints. And if anything, it's made me a better person. It's made me a fighter. It's made me stronger. And it has made me healthier, Because when you're going to the doctor regularly to be seen, the doctors are on top of your wellness. But for people who don't have a disease, who don't go to the hospital, a lot of times they have sudden incidences and challenges because they're not on top of maybe their blood work or things that may run in a family. So that's another thing. People with illnesses who go to the doctors regularly and take care of themselves, typically, even though they have an illness, are healthier. So anyway, back to the main story, back to me getting diagnosed at 11. So I went to a school, I went to a Catholic elementary school in the Lower Ninth Ward. They had about maybe 400 children max at the school. And it was myself, and they had another young man who was a grade older than me, who had diabetes. And when I found out, I was like, oh, I'm not the only one. So one day I approached him and I said, guess what? I said, I have diabetes too. And he said, oh, you do? Here, you want some lemon heads? Candy? And I said, we're not supposed to eat that. And he didn't care. And so he didn't really want to be my friend. He didn't care that we both had something that we could have kind of gone through together. And he ate what he wanted to eat. He did what he wanted to do. And I found out after I graduated from elementary school, and I found out that he had actually passed away because he didn't want to give up his candy. He didn't want to give up sweets. And I didn't want to end up like that. You know, I remember I lost so much weight. And when I think back, y'all, like being a young person and you might like somebody in the neighborhood or you might like somebody in class. So I had a crush on somebody in elementary school, and I had friends, or rather acquaintances in the neighborhood. One in particular, she was a hater, y'all. She was jealous. And so she used my diabetes as something to make fun of me about. And if she knew that I liked somebody, she would go after them. And her thing was that she had a big butt and I didn't have a big butt, and that I was skinny, you know, and she got people, you know, on board to call me Skinny Felice. And, you know, these are the kind of things you have to deal with when you're a young person with a chronic illness. You have to go to school and you have to try to fit in. And sometimes that makes you not want to share what's going on in your life. But that's not necessary because the good outweighs the bad. You know, so I can remember I had lost so much weight and I was so skinny when I got diagnosed that they had a song that a lot of you young people may or may not know. It's called Brick House. And it was a song by this group called the Commodores. And, you know, she's a brick house. And so everybody used to talk about, oh, she's a brick house. She's a brick house. And she's a brick house. And I always wanted to be a brick house. But I had diabetes and I developed it right at the time when I was approaching adolescence. So my hating neighborhood friends, I guess, would be like, oh yeah, who's a brick house? We'd be playing ball or something. And all the people who's a brick house, raise your hand. And, you know, and she would get the guys, who's the finest girl in the neighborhood and who's the brick house? And of course they didn't pick me because I was all skinny and I had diabetes. And I used to pray at night. When I would go to bed, I would say, Lord, please let me be a brick house. Please let me be a brick house. But when you're a young person and you're around your peers and they make you feel less than because you have a disease that you can't control, they're the ones with the problem. So if you're in that kind of environment as a child living with diabetes, I hope and pray that you have somebody to talk to. It's a parent, a sibling, a close relative, your counselor. And right now, school is a mess because of the pandemic. Everybody's home. But I hope that there's a support system that you have. Even if you talk with your physician or the nurse or somebody, let them know what you're going through, because you don't need to be stressing. That causes your blood sugars to elevate. And also, you need to understand that that's just a part of life. And of, like I said, of all the diseases that I could have, I think diabetes was the best fit for me, because the only reason people know would be if I told them, you know. And it's important as a young person that you have someone who knows at school or your friends, and let them know, because you didn't choose this disease. And for whatever reason, you have it. But you can have a great life. So when I think back of the things that happened when I was a young girl, before when I was still in elementary school and played with my neighborhood friends, some of the things I went through, they were not pleasant. Let me tell you about the girl who made it her business to try to make me feel less than because I have diabetes. I'm not even going to tell you what has happened to her, because God bless her. And that's all I'm going to say. But people people get what they get. And I'm a just let that be. Because I'm not trying to speak negatively about anyone. My rationale for mentioning this person is because realistically there are people who may try to make you feel bad because you have diabetes, or you have an illness, and it's something that one of your so-called friends or classmates can bring up and talk about to make you feel bad. Don't feel bad about it. Feel victorious, because you know what? Every day you get up and you face diabetes and you do what you need to do, you're winning. You've already overcome such a tremendous thing by not giving up on yourself. And know that you are beautiful and you are wonderful and you are talented. Had it not been for my having diabetes, I would not have had a successful career as a nurse for over 30 years. And I've done some things in my life that I'm very proud of. And I'm continuing to do things at my age, y'all. At this old age that I'm at, I'm still dreaming, I'm still creating, and I have a great quality of life. So young people, know that sometimes people will pick the dumbest stuff, especially your haters. They're going to pick the dumbest stuff to try to make you feel less than. So, a good defense is, you must really have an issue for you to tell. Let me back it up. Hold on. Oh, no. Hey, y'all, I had to pick up because my camera was acting crazy. But anyway, I was talking about when y'all young people have a hater, you got a hater in a class, and this person is, or at home around the house, trying to make fun of you because you have diabetes. A simple thing my mama used to always tell me was, sticks and stones can break your bones, but words can never hurt. That is so true. And know this person here is living proof. The same people who tried to hate me and hate on me because I had diabetes, years later were the same people who were like, you were always so kind, Felice. You've been a good friend my whole life. And they've even apologized. Kids are going to be kids. And I could tell you, this is a funny story. It's maybe not be appropriate. But anyway, so one time I was in elementary school. And for the most part, I didn't get teased when I was at school. I had to deal with, everybody has a bad boy in the class. And the bad boy in the class would say stupid stuff like call me diabetes names and all that. But that didn't even fly too much, because fortunately I went to school with a lot of really good kids who were kind and loving. But I did have somebody sitting behind me one day in class, and she didn't like something that the teacher had allowed me to do. So she started sitting behind me, kicking my desk, calling me an old diabetic thing. Well, I had to, I turned around and I set her world on fire. I tapped that, and I got in trouble because the bad kids at school, when you got in trouble, they had an area that was sectioned off called a corral because it was for children who acted like wild animals. So that day, yeah, I went to the corral. I had to go sit in the corral and do punish work because I handled up on this girl who got beside herself and started calling me diabetic thing. That was the only fight I ever had in school related to diabetes. Another blessing that I did have was one of my best friends to this day had also had a health issue that occurred with her the same time I developed diabetes, and it made her real skinny. And it was like I was divinely blessed with my friend. But what she had that was wrong with her was fixable. But by the same tokens, our parents were supportive. Our mamas were great friends, and it made my transition into living with diabetes easier. And so for young people, when I was little, they had a diabetes camp, but it was so expensive, we couldn't afford it. I come from a family of 9 kids, so I just had to learn and grow and become who I was destined to be. And fortunately for me, I had a good support system. So I hope you have, I know a lot of you all have parents that are real busy. You might have to take care of your brothers and sisters and have a lot of responsibility. And that can be challenging. So I always ask you to talk to your doctor about that. Talk to a counselor at school and let them know if you're going through changes, because I have seen a lot of incidences where young people passed away from diabetes because they just could not adjust and could not make the necessary changes. So, it's manageable and you can do it. So when I think about when I was diagnosed, and then I that was the 6th grade, junior high school, that's when I became diagnosed. When it came to eating and taking my medicine and all that, I took my medicine at home before I went to school. And the cafeteria food at school, they give you well-balanced meals. I couldn't eat the cake. A lot of times I couldn't have things that were served. I got frustrated. So at one point, my mom, the school allowed my mom to have me bring my food, which helped out because there were times when I'd be in class and I'd get a low blood sugar because my body was still trying to adjust. And then in adolescence, it's the time where all your hormones and the chemicals and functions of your body are adjusting and growing and changing. So it's a very dynamic time. And so it's a really important time to stay on top of your blood sugars. So even though my story starts a long time ago for most of you, it's still relevant today. I mean, a lot of the things I went through as a young person with diabetes is still going on. So when I got into high school, I could remember I managed my diabetes very well. I took my medicine, I checked my blood sugars, I did everything that I was supposed to do. Even in high school, I did very well. The thing about when I was in high school was that's when in our family we started dating, really dating, not like a little elementary school neighborhood crush or whatever. And I can remember my first official boyfriend. And I can remember, y'all, when he was calling me up, he was going to call me up for the first time. And we were going to talk. And I didn't know how to tell him I had diabetes. I worried for weeks about, oh my God, how am I going to tell this guy have diabetes because he's not going to want to date me. And so we were talking, he called me up and we were on the phone talking. And I said, I have something very serious to tell you. And he said, what? And he said, I said, I have diabetes. And he said, oh, my sister has it. My mama has it too. And it was like, whew, wow. So he understood about it. A lot of people have it, young and old, but for me it was, I hope this guy does not reject me because I have an illness. And that is a real concern for a young person, for a young person with a chronic illness that is not evident or obvious. That can be a challenge. But I did it. That was gone to the wayside, and I've been good ever since. I never had a problem. It was like, that was like a positive experience of my sharing diabetes with a peer. And fortunately for me, it wasn't a situation where it made me ashamed or feel less than. And really, for most of my time as a young person, it was like that. Most of my friends were so loving and supportive. They did kind things. My parents, they just were outstanding. They had, I could tell they used to have this stuff called dietetic ice cream at McKenzie's. That's an old bakery that's no longer around. Yeah. Anyway, they had dietetic ice cream, and they would even make a sugar-free cake that was so good. They would sell out so fast. But my parents would get that for me. My dad worked at night, and on the way home, he would stop at this donut shop and get me donuts before they put the sugar on them, And in New Orleans, we love these things called snowballs. And we used to walk to the snowball stand and get a snowball. But I couldn't have snowballs because they had sugar in them, syrup. But they were so good. I remember how they tasted when I was a kid, like before I had diabetes. And so my mom would get the ice. And she put a diet drink on it, Diet Pepsi, I can remember, or Tab, But the thing of it was I was happy to get that because I felt included and I felt like I was a part of things. I didn't care that it wasn't a syrupy snowball, which now they have sugar-free snowballs that taste as good as the regular ones and you can't tell. And that's the beauty of how evolution and time changes. There are a lot of things for people with diabetes that I didn't have. So I used to get in the kitchen. I would do recipes. I made a sugar-free king cake, which is around Mardi Gras. It's the kind of cake we eat, a pastry. I made, excuse me, I also I used to make the best sugar-free banana pudding. I made sugar-free, I made all kind of stuff because I was determined that I wanted some things for myself that I knew I couldn't have, the real version of, but they were great replacements, and that satisfied me. So when the first time when I started wavering off of being really good about not, as we say, cheating, that happened in college. I started eating things and going out to gatherings and trying to have stuff that I knew I couldn't have because I wanted to fit in. That was a challenging time for me. And even not so much then, but it was challenging enough. When I got older, to like the times when it was time to go out and party, that's when I really made poor decisions in regards to managing my diabetes. I would go to parties and stuff, and college parties, and I would be eating and drinking things that I knew could cause issues with my health. But fortunately, throughout all that, one thing, I never stopped taking my insulin like I was supposed to, and I stayed on top of my blood sugars. And I think that part helped me out so much But there are some who refuse. It's called that. See that being in denial? Being in denial can come and go throughout the course of your living with diabetes. And like I said, today, this week, makes it 45 years I've lived with this disease. And have I been the perfect diabetic or the perfect person living with diabetes? No, because there is no shit.